Quiet room. A young man, barely out of his teens, dips his brush in ink. His name is Iso. He's writing a letter home. To his mother. He speaks of honor, of the emperor, of cherry blossoms that fall at their peak. It's a farewell. He won't be coming back. Then, he writes a word charged with 1,000 years of history. Kamikaze. Divine wind. The original divine wind wasn't a weapon forged of men and machines. It was a miracle. Twice in the 13th century, as Kublai Khan's vast Mongol fleet descended upon Japan, massive typhoons rose from the sea, smashing the invasion force against the rocks. A nation was saved by its gods, by the wind itself. A powerful legend was born. Fast forward 7 centuries. The year is 1944. The wind is no longer a prayer. It's a storm of smoke and steel. The United States Navy, an unstoppable industrial titan, carves its way across the Pacific. Island by island, Japan's empire is being dismantled. On the decks of American carriers, pilots are confident, well-fed, and fly the best planes in the world. Their numbers seem endless. For Japan, the picture is one of desperation. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, what the Americans called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, has been a catastrophe. Japan's veteran pilot corps is gone, shattered. Their best aircraft are at the bottom of the ocean. Fuel reserves are dwindling to almost nothing. In the mess halls of Japanese air bases, the silence is heavy. Every day, more chairs are empty. The losses are unsustainable. The war, by any conventional measure, is already lost. Into this crucible of defeat steps a man with a radical, horrifying idea. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi. He's a pragmatist, a stern man, not a mystic. But he looks at the grim arithmetic of the war and sees only one path forward. He knows his young, inexperienced pilots have little chance of surviving a dogfight, let alone sinking a carrier with conventional bombing. A rookie pilot might get one shot in a dozen if he's lucky, but what if the pilot asterisk was asterisk the weapon? What if the plane itself became the guided missile? A one-way trip. Onishi convinces himself this isn't madness. It's a strategy born of necessity, a way to trade one pilot for one warship. A way to level the playing field against America's overwhelming industrial might. He travels to the Philippines, to the beleaguered airfields where the last remnants of Japan's naval air power are gathered. He doesn't command. He persuades. He speaks of sacrifice, of a unique opportunity to turn the tide. Whispers spread among the cadets. Talk of a new kind of mission. A special attack unit. The rituals of courage, long part of the samurai code, are given a new, terrible meaning. The symbol of the cherry blossom, beautiful, perfect, and tragically short-lived, is invoked. Young men are told their sacrifice will be the new divine wind. They are promised an honor that masks the brutal reality of a system on the verge of total collapse. Was this a nation's descent into a collective death wish? A cultural pathology? Or was it something colder? A brutal calculation designed to inflict so much pain on the Americans that they would sue for peace? The secret, it turns out, lies not just in the poems and the propaganda, but in the numbers. October 1944. Mabalacat Airfield, the Philippines. The air is thick with humidity and the smell of aviation fuel. 5 Mitsubishi Zero fighters stand on the dusty runway, each armed with a 550-pound bomb. The pilots, wrapped in white headbands, perform a final ceremony. Engines cough, sputter, and then roar to life. The first organized special attack unit is about to take flight. The divine wind is about to be unleashed. The roar of engines becomes a thunderous overture to desperation. It's October 1944. The vast expanse of the Leyte Gulf is about to become a crucible. American ships, a steel city on the water, are pushing relentlessly towards the Philippines. In a makeshift headquarters on Luzon, Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi faces a grim reality. His air fleets are shattered, his veteran pilots gone. He issues a field order born not of strategy but of sheer will. The first Special Attack Corps is formed. There is no grand announcement, just a quiet, chilling directive. The first volunteers take to the skies. On October 25th, the world witnesses the horrifying birth of a new tactic. A handful of Japanese Zeros, each carrying a 550-pound bomb, deliberately break from their formations. They don't peel off to dogfight. They dive, clipped, frantic calls flood the American radio channels. Bandits diving! They're not pulling out. The pilots in those cockpits are a new kind of weapon. Their final moments are a blur of gauges, the rapidly expanding silhouette of a ship, and the roar of the wind. The escort carrier USS St. Lo is engulfed in a blossom of fire and smoke. A single zero plunges through its flight deck. Within minutes, secondary explosions tear the ship apart. On the bridges and in the wardrooms of the U.S. Navy, shock gives way to a dreadful understanding. Damage control teams battle infernos unlike any they've trained for. This isn't just a lucky hit. It's a deliberate, terrifyingly effective act. News of the St. Lo's sinking and the damage to other carriers reverberates all the way back to Tokyo. In the hushed halls of the Imperial General Headquarters, the reports are met with a mix of revulsion and grim satisfaction. Senior officers, men who had built their careers on naval doctrine and honorable combat, are appalled. To them, it's a perversion of the warrior's code. But others, seeing the overwhelming industrial might of the Allies, argue that this is the only lever they have left. This is the only way to trade one pilot for one warship, a price they are now willing to pay. The debate is fierce but short-lived. The spectacular success at Leyte greenlights the expansion of the program. The machinery of sacrifice grinds into motion. Across airbases, the concept of volunteering takes on a dark, coercive edge. It isn't a call for heroes, it's an expectation. A sign-up sheet is passed around a silent briefing room. To not sign your name is to invite shame, to be branded a coward in a culture where honor is everything. The pressure is immense, the silence deafening. Once a pilot signs, a somber ritual unfolds. He is celebrated as a living god. He shares ceremonial cups of sake with his commanding officer. A white hachimaki headband, a symbol of perseverance and courage, is tied around his forehead. He might receive a senninbari, a 1,000-stitch belt, sewn by 1,000 different women, each stitch a prayer for his spirit. In his final hours, he writes letters home last words to his mother, his wife, his children pressing his personal seal onto the paper with a trembling hand. These weren't faceless fanatics. They were sons, brothers, and fathers caught in an unforgiving historical vice. The program rapidly expands beyond a few desperate squadrons. The Army creates its own special attack units. Airfields across the Philippines and the southern Japanese island of Kyushu are repurposed, becoming launch pads for one-way missions. And with the formalization of the tactic comes innovation in its tools. Engineers unveil new purpose-built weapons of terror. The most infamous is the Yokosuka MXY-7, a rocket-powered, human-piloted flying bomb. Allied intelligence gives it a chillingly simple code name, Baka, the Japanese word for fool. As 1945 dawns, the war machine grinds towards Okinawa. This will be the final decisive battle before the invasion of the Japanese home islands. For Japan, it is the last line of defense, and they are prepared to throw everything they have. The image of a lone pilot, flying into a storm of steel, is a powerful one. But to truly understand what happened in the skies over the Pacific, we have to look past the myth and into the cold, hard mechanics of war. This wasn't just about blind devotion. It was a calculated, desperate strategy, honed by some of Japan's best military minds. The pilots were trained in specific, deadly tactics. They learned to approach from the direction of the sun, using its glare to blind the lookouts on the ships below. They perfected sea-skimming runs, flying just feet above the waves to slip under the lobes of American radar. Their dives were timed with chilling precision, aimed at hitting carrier decks just as the combat air patrols were switching over, creating a brief, fatal window of vulnerability. They even used weather fronts as cover, emerging from a squall or a cloud bank with little to no warning. In response, the U.S. Navy built a fortress at sea. The first line of defense was a ring of radar picket destroyers stationed dozens of miles out from the main fleet. These were the sentries, the lonely watchmen whose job was to sound the first alarm. Their call would galvanize the Combat Information Center, or CIC, aboard the carriers. Deep in the heart of the ship, men hunched over glowing screens, plotting intercepts and directing fighters to meet the incoming threats. The air became a lethal chessboard. And if a plane broke through that fighter screen, it faced a wall of fire. The new proximity-fuzed anti-aircraft shells were a game-changer. These shells didn't need a direct hit. They exploded when they got close to a target, filling the air with a cloud of shrapnel. Closer still, flotillas of small LCS gunboats, bristling with automatic cannons, threw up what the pilots called rings of fire. a final dense curtain of lead. Yet, despite these formidable defenses, the planes kept coming. Back in headquarters, Japanese staff officers did the grim arithmetic of this divine wind. They weren't expecting every plane to succeed. The calculations were brutal. If it took 10 sorties, 10 lost pilots and planes, to cripple one American aircraft carrier, it was deemed a worthy exchange. The numbers bear out the horrifying effectiveness of this strategy. From late 1944 until the end of the war, these missions sank dozens of Allied ships and damaged hundreds more. The human cost on both sides was staggering. But this was a war of attrition, and Japan was running out of everything. The machinery of war was fraying at the edges. Brand new high-performance aircraft were a luxury of the past. Instead, ground crews worked miracles, salvaging parts from wrecked planes, patching together airframes that were barely flight-worthy. High-octane aviation fuel was scarce, replaced by cruder low-octane mixtures that sputtered and choked the engines, reducing their performance and reliability. The pilots themselves were a reflection of this desperation. Gone were the seasoned veterans with thousands of hours in the cockpit. The new generation of pilots were often teenagers, rushed through training with fewer than 100 flight hours. They learned just enough to take off, fly in a straight line, and aim their aircraft. The psychological toll was immense. In the mess tents, they would sing songs and share jokes, a fragile shield of bravado against the unspoken dread that hung in the air. They were living on borrowed time, and everyone knew it. Let's follow one of them. We'll call him Kenji. It's the morning of Operation Kikusui 2, the massive aerial assault on the U.S. fleet at Okinawa. Kenji poses for a final photograph, a faint, forced smile on his young face. The night before, he wrote a single line in his diary: "I am afraid, but my fear is not greater than my duty." As he taxis his plane onto the dusty runway, the ground crew stands at attention, saluting. They watch as he lifts off, a lone silhouette against the morning sky, joining a swarm of other aircraft heading south. He passes the point of no return, the coastline of Japan fading behind him. Below is nothing but gray, indifferent water. His radio is silent. And on the horizon, he can see it, a smudge that grows into the shape of the American fleet, surrounded by the dark puffs of anti-aircraft fire and the white contrails of dueling fighter planes. The grind of the Okinawa campaign began in earnest. Between April and June 1945, a storm unlike any other descended from the skies. Imperial General Headquarters unleashed Operation Kikusui, or Floating Chrysanthemum, a series of 10 massive coordinated kamikaze waves. Each wave was a desperate gamble, a calculated attempt to overwhelm the American fleet's defenses through sheer terrifying numbers. The sky over the Ryukyus became a canvas of smoke trails and explosions. In a dimly lit command bunker in southern Okinawa, Japanese commanders huddled over maps stained with coffee rings. Fingers traced the flight paths, the interception points, the intended targets. Every line drawn represented a life, a final mission. There was a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere, a blend of strategic calculus and grim acceptance. The hope was that this sacrifice would be so costly, so shocking, that Washington would abandon its plans to invade the Japanese mainland. Every successful hit, every damaged American ship, wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a signal to stiffen their resolve, to prove that the spirit of Japan was unbreakable. Miles away, on the heaving deck of a Fletcher-class destroyer, the world was a cacophony of shouting and steel. Bandit, bearing 270 Angel 5. A lookout screamed, his voice raw. The ship's 5-inch guns swiveled, their barrels seeking the target. Gunners squinted, their hands slick with sweat, trying to track a weaving, erratic speck against the glaring sun. That speck grew, resolving itself into the distinct shape of a zero. It wasn't just a machine. It was a pilot, a person on a one-way trip. The air ripped apart with the thunder of anti-aircraft fire. Puffs of black smoke blossomed around the incoming plane. It wasn't about gore. It was about the sound, the near miss that made your heart stop. The sickening lurch of the ship as another plane slipped through the screen, and the emotional whiplash of watching a nearby vessel erupt in flames. The moral complexities were staggering. Back at airbases in Kyushu, young men penned letters home. Some wrote of honor, of dying for the emperor, their belief unwavering. Others, in hushed conversations or private diaries, confessed their fears, their doubts about the strategy. Flight instructors, men who had taught these boys to fly, found themselves whispering apologies, as they strapped them into cockpits for the last time. They checked the harnesses, offered a final word of encouragement, and watched them taxi away, knowing they were sending them to their deaths. This was the cold, hard logic of the divine wind. As the weeks wore on, the tactics escalated. The Japanese arsenal of desperation grew. From secret cave hangars carved into Okinawa's hillsides, rocket-powered Ohka cherry blossom bombs were launched from mother planes, screaming toward the fleet at over 600 miles per hour. At sea level, explosive motorboats, manned by single operators, sliced through the surf, aiming for the hulls of destroyers and transports. And beneath the waves, submariners sealed themselves into Kaiten human torpedoes, guiding their explosive charges on a final silent journey. Then came the news that sent a ripple of awe and dread through both sides. Operation Tengo. The pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the super battleship Yamato, was sailing south from its home port. The pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the super battleship Yamato, never stood a chance. On April 7, 1945, swarms of American carrier aircraft blotted out the sun and descended upon it. In just 2 hours, the mightiest battleship ever built was sent to the bottom of the sea. It was a brutal, swift lesson. No amount of martial spirit could overcome the overwhelming industrial power of the United States. This was the harsh reality that the divine wind was meant to defy. Throughout May and June, the final Kikusui, or floating chrysanthemum, operations continued. The pilots were younger now. Their training rushed. Their briefings were hurried, their faces a mixture of youthful bravado and quiet dread. They flew obsolete planes, sometimes with only enough fuel for a one-way trip. Occasional hits still found their mark, tearing open steel decks and searing the hearts of American sailors. But the grim math was undeniable. Improved American anti-aircraft fire, radar-directed fighter patrols, and the sheer number of ships created a nearly impenetrable defensive screen. The ledger of losses tilted overwhelmingly against Japan. And so we arrive at the secret this series has been circling. The Kamikaze phenomenon wasn't a spontaneous, nationwide cult of death. It was a calculated, manufactured strategy. It was a deliberate fusion of ancient myth, the original divine wind that saved Japan from the Mongols, and modern, cold-blooded arithmetic. It was born from intense rivalries between the Japanese Army and Navy, each trying to prove its relevance. It was amplified by powerful propaganda that framed self-sacrifice as the ultimate honor, a way to extract an outsized effect from rapidly dwindling resources. But in the end, it was a strategy of desperation, a last roll of the dice that could never overcome the sheer scale of American industrial might. The cost was staggering, measured in both steel and souls. Over 3,800 Japanese pilots perished. On the Allied side, nearly 5,000 sailors were killed and another 5,000 wounded. Dozens of ships were sunk and hundreds more were damaged. But beyond the numbers was the terror, a unique psychological scar etched into the memories of everyone who witnessed it. For the American sailors, it was the horror of watching a human being intentionally fly a plane into their ship, their home. For the Japanese, it was a complex web of duty, pressure, and fear. In the aftermath, the human reckoning began. One surviving pilot later spoke of the immense shame he felt for not completing his mission, mixed with an undeniable private relief at being alive. An American sailor recounted the haunting image of a young pilot's face, glimpsed for a split second in the canopy of a diving Zero, a human connection in a moment of absolute violence. As Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over the radio, announcing Japan's surrender and silencing the guns, the architect of the Kamikaze strategy, Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi, performed seppuku. His final note was an apology to the souls of the young pilots he had sent to their deaths, and a plea for the youth of Japan to rebuild their nation in peace. The word kamikaze itself tells the story. It began as a tale of a miraculous wind that saved an island nation from invasion. Centuries later, that same story was repurposed to command the ultimate sacrifice from its young men. It's a powerful reminder of how nations, when pushed to the brink of existence, often turn to their most potent legends and the coldest calculations to survive. They forge myths into weapons, hoping to change their fate. The Second World War is filled with these complex